All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Annette Roth. I am the Community Development Manager here at the Washington State Arts Commission. I'm going to talk to you today about building a strong application for the Building for the Arts grant program. We have with us today an ASL interpreter. You should hopefully see her on your screen, spotlighted. And so if you need translation services or interpretation services, she is there for that. Also, if you have questions about how that works or you can't, for whatever reason, see Elizabeth, please message Adrienne Kerrigan. She's also with us today. All right, so we're going to begin. And like I mentioned, we're here to talk about building a strong application for Building for the Arts. This is the last of a three-part webinar series that ArtsWA is hosting about the Building for the Arts grant program. In the first episode, or the first of the series of this webinar, we provided you with an overview of Building for the Arts and how it works. In the second webinar, we talked about how to build a solid project and a plan. And so in this one, we're going to talk about the application and what you can do to prepare yourself to apply for this grant, what you should be anticipating. Again, like in the other webinars, we will take questions at the end of, or we will answer some questions at the end of the webinar. If you have some questions as we go through this, please feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat for now. We ask folks that if you are joining us, to please make sure that you're muted so that we don't get any feedback or hear anything, any extraneous conversations while we're trying to go through the webinar. Okay, Adrienne, let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So before we jump into talking about the application itself, we want to give folks a brief overview of Building for the Arts program so that if you missed either of the other webinars, you have an idea of what this program is all about. So Building for the Arts is a Washington State Department of Commerce program. It is administered by their Community Capital Facilities team. We may have some folks on the line with us today from Commerce who might be able to answer additional questions at the end of the session. So this is a competitive grant program, and it awards state funds to nonprofit, community-based organizations to defray up to 33% of eligible capital costs for the acquisition and major construction or renovation of arts and cultural facilities. It is available to tribes and nonprofits registered in Washington State, and it is specifically for arts-related facilities such as an art museum, cultural facility, theaters, performing arts centers, a tribal center such as a longhouse, exhibition halls and spaces, things like broadcast or recording studios, that sort of thing. So historical museums are ineligible for this program and should instead contact the Washington State Historical Society. Now, like I mentioned, the Department of Commerce administers the grant, so they are the ones that will be hosting the grant and doing the application process and taking a look at what applications come in and making determinations about who will get funded. Our role here at the Arts Commission is to work in partnership with Commerce to do outreach and informational consultation about the program. So, as the state arts agency, we have a strong connection to arts and culture organizations. And through our partnership, both agencies hope to achieve increased equity across the state in who applies for the program, as well as who gets funded, particularly from rural and underserved regions. Next slide, please. In the current law, the cap for the available funds is $18 million per biennium for all grantees. So the maximum grant awards available for the current funding round are $2 million, and there is no minimum grant amount. The grant does have a required match, which means that in order to receive funding, you must have your own organizational funds to bring to the table. The grants can cover up to 33% of project funds. So, and this is also a reimbursable grant, meaning that Commerce will, if you are funded, Commerce would reimburse you for the eligible costs after they have been incurred and documentation has been submitted to Commerce for reimbursement. They cannot provide any advance payments or any advance reimbursement under any kind of circumstances. Now, some costs associated with the projects can be reimbursed and some cannot. We discussed it in length, what those are in the first two webinars, but essentially, really quickly, construction related costs such as design and engineering, the actual construction, obviously, landscaping, and that sort of thing can be reimbursed. And things that cannot be reimbursed include things like administration, fundraising, feasibility studies, lease or mortgage payments, moving of equipment, or and also non-capital expenses, like such as a website, for example. And please note that if you have a project that has a lot of different things going on with it, that only arts and culture related aspects, building, of the project can be funded. Okay. So now, next slide, please. And just as a reminder, as folks are coming in, if you can make sure to mute yourself so that we don't hear any background noise, that would be great. So now we want to talk a little bit about what you need to think about and what to prepare for as you get ready to apply for this grant program. I want to preface this by saying that, of course, there is no guarantee of funding. This is a very highly competitive program with an increasingly large grantee pool each biennium. And so before you get into this and to make sure that you're going to be competitive, it's important for you to do a really honest self-assessment. So does your organization have what it takes to make this project happen on time? Do you have systems in place to properly track and manage the grant? Can you meet all the contract criteria if you were to receive funding? And then so that's just for the actual project and the grant itself. But then you also need to take a look at your organization to look at if you have the capacity to manage the facility and ensure its long-term viability. And also ask the questions, what would happen if your organization didn't provide the services that you provide? How is that going to impact your community? And what can you do to ensure that that does not happen? Next slide, please. We'll talk a little bit about eligibility for the grant here. So, organizations do have to demonstrate specific eligibility requirements to be able to apply for this grant. So they must meet the following eligibility standards at the time the application is submitted. The first and most important one is to be a tribe or registered nonprofit in Washington State. You must have binding control of the project site and have a legally constituted board of directors for your organization. You must agree to participate in the LEED certification process or submit and receive an exemption. You must agree to pay state prevailing wages as of the date the budget becomes effective, and then also have made substantial progress in a capital fundraising campaign, meaning that you have a good amount of money to bring to the table when you apply for this grant to be able to get the project moving. Making sure that you are an arts or cultural facility that is open to the public is also key. And again, like we said, historical museums are not eligible, nor can residential facilities be funded from within this program. Next slide, please. So we'll talk a little bit about the application itself. The Building for the Arts application is a very extensive and long application. As you can imagine, if the state is going to be investing potentially $2 million into a program, they want to ensure that the organization and the project is going to serve the needs of the constituents. The application will be filled out exclusively online at the Department of Commerce's grant application portal. The link for the application will be published when the grant opens. Just a note, paper copies of the grant won't be accepted. And if you need specific accommodations for accessibility with the grant application itself, you should contact the Department of Commerce team directly so that they can support you. Okay. We will provide contact information for their team at the end of the slideshow. Now, when you start the process of the application, there's going to be a step in the online application where you'll have to answer questions to see if your project is eligible or not. And if you are eligible, you will be able to fill out the rest of the application. So now we're not going to delve into the specific questions or sections of the application in this webinar. That would be unfair for folks who aren't watching it. They would not get that kind of information. And so it's not appropriate for us to do that. But we do want to talk a little bit about a high level overview of what some of the application topics are going to be. Okay. So the application includes questions about organizational information, about your organization, your board, directors, financial information about your organization. There's a pretty extensive section about the budget and the project scope of work and the results that you hope to see from this project. There is also going to be questions about the community that you serve and the needs, and then also the stakeholders as well. So you should be prepared to provide narrative and financial numbers for those various topics. So there will be a number of documents that you will be required to submit with your application. Some of them are required, such as the LEED certification form and the stakeholder survey reports, and some of the requested documentation that they have may not be required, right? And so as you go through this, you'll want to pay attention to the documentation needs and which apply to your project and which ones do not, right? And so we recommend that everybody take stock of the documents that are requested and or required for this application when you begin the application. There's a pretty extensive list, and it might be a good idea for you all to develop a checklist of all of the things that you need to do to be able to fulfill the application. Next slide, please. There are a number of review criteria for this grant application. And when the project is scored, it is on a 0 to 100 scale, essentially. And so there's a section of preliminary points that are assigned to the project, which is based on some set criteria. And that makes up about 40% of the total, right? And so that includes the percentage of funds that you've raised, if you've started your design work already, if you're located in a distressed community. And then there's another piece of the application, which is another 60% of the application. And this is where you have an opportunity to really help your application stand out and make sure that it's a strong, compelling narrative that describes your project. Okay. So the 5 criteria that are on the screen are the things that make up that 60% of the total. We're going to run through them here. So the first one to think about is project readiness. And so this is essentially your organization's ability to complete the project in a timely fashion, right? So do you have a realistic funding timeline? Are you looking at all of the factors that are involved in making sure that your organization can take this on? And also, are there environmental factors such as public opposition, for example, that might delay the project? The second one to think about is organizational capacity, which is essentially your organization's ability to effectively run your facility once the project is complete. So what is your organization's track record? Do you have a realistic understanding of what is required to run the facility for a long term? Is your organization solid? Your board solid? Do you have solid financials? Do you have a plan for the future in that regard? When you're looking at the project results, one of the things to think about is how this project is going to increase the quality of the activities that you provide, right? So if you're a theater, for example, how is this going to improve the quality of the theater products that you provide? How also does this project demonstrate an efficient use of public funds? As a government agencies, that's one of the things that we strive to ensure is that all of the funding that we provide to our constituents is highest and best use, and also if effective use of public funds, because that's what these are. Okay. The community need is another review criteria to think about. And so in this, it's going to be important for you to demonstrate evidence of community need. Um, what is it that makes what you do in your facility so important to the community? Are there alternatives in the community for the activities that you provide? If they're not, if there are, then you really need to be able to demonstrate the value of investment in your project. And so you also need to think about demonstrating why it's necessary to make these improvements to your facility and how specifically that's going to help your community. Now, that could be a specific constituency that you serve. It could be the community at large. That's sort of for you to decide who your target markets are and who are the people that you serve with the activities that you do. And then the final review criteria to consider is stakeholder participation. So, do you have partnerships with relevant stakeholders in your community and in the region? Are you committed to building those partnerships with targeted groups that you serve? Do your stakeholders think that this is a good idea and are behind your project, in that they want to see it come to fruition and recognize the value of the work that you are doing? Okay. Next slide, please. So we'll talk a little bit here about some tips that you should follow or pay attention to ensure that you have a smooth application process. Now, please note that the application will open on May 1st. So you have a little bit of time here, about 5 weeks, to prepare in advance for the application opening. But once the application opens, we recommend that you read the grant guidelines very closely. They describe much of the information that you'll need to know as you move through this application process. Now, the guidelines for the upcoming grant are not posted yet. They will be posted probably right around the time that the grant opens. However, you can go to the Department of Commerce's website and find the grant guidelines for the last application round, which was for this current biennium, and it was the round that opened up essentially 2 years ago. Now, you can take a look at these to get a basic understanding of the requirements of the program. Some of the pieces of the program have changed potentially from last time, but a lot of it is very similar. So you should get a good sense of what those guidelines look like. Um, we also want to talk about starting to do the requirements early. So, like I mentioned, the grant opens on May 1st, but please note that the application window is relatively short. Last year or last funding cycle, I think that the application was open for about 7-ish weeks. And so we anticipate that it will be roughly that same length again this year. There are some things that are requirements that you'll probably want to start working on now if you have not done so already. One of them is looking at that LEED certification declaration or the exemption document. Are you going to be following LEED or are you asking for an exemption? And if you're asking for an exemption, then you need to be able to fill out a form and make that request. There's a sample of this form on Commerce's website. Again, also there are stakeholder surveys that need to be completed as part of this process as well. A sample document of that is also on their website as well. And each of the programs needs to go through an archaeological review through the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. This is something that is legislatively mandated as part of the program to ensure that you're not disturbing any historical sites or indigenous sites inadvertently. So those are things you're going to want to take a look at soon, right? Now, also something to think about is paying attention to the questions and in the application and answering them appropriately. One of the things you'll want to do is pay attention to what that question is asking. So for example, if a question is asking you to describe the scope of the project, don't talk about community need during that section. There will be opportunities for you to talk about community need where it's appropriate. So read the question closely, answer that question to the best of your ability. It's not necessary to over explain or try to fit the entire narrative into one topical area or to go off on tangents either. I find that for an application of this size, it's helpful to take a look at the entire application before you start answering it, so you can see the sort of logical arc that the application takes. There's sections that build on each other, and you want to answer those questions so that they build off each other in succession instead of trying to just cram all of the information into one section and then you end up repeating yourself over and over throughout the application. That won't be helpful for you, and it's not going to tell a really compelling story, right? We want to make sure that the questions are answered as they should be answered. That's really important. Next slide, please. All right, so really quickly here is just an overview of what the application timeline is going to be. Like I mentioned, it opens on May 1. Applications will be due at some point, in the summer. This says late summer, but probably a little bit earlier than that. It will go once applications are reviewed preliminarily, and the ones that are considered to be ineligible or whatever they will be set aside. The ones that could be recommended potential funding will go to an advisory board, and they will review all those applications that made it through that first step in the process and make recommendations. They will submit them to be considered as part of the Department of Commerce's budget, which will be submitted to the Office of Financial Management and the governor's office for review. Now, for those that don't know how the budget cycle works here in Washington, the governor's budget usually comes out first at the end of the year. So for us, it will be the December of 2024. And then when the legislative session begins, both the House and the Senate will have an opportunity to look at the budget to sort of, what do they keep? What do they not keep? They do a lot of compromise and agreement about what that final budget is going to look like. They make a decision about that, and then the budget gets signed for the upcoming, biennium in June of 2025. And then the biennium begins on July 1. Funds, generally speaking, get released to commerce to be able to start being put into contracts and dispersed and that sort of thing in September of that year. And then the idea is that projects should be completed within this fiscal biennium, which for the purposes of this grant funding go from July 1, 2025 through June 30, 2027. So you want to make sure that your project will be completed before that time. Next slide, please. All right, great. So there are some upcoming dates that are important for you all to be aware of. Again, the grant application opens on May 1. Building for the Arts folks at the Department of Commerce will be hosting a number of online and in-person workshops throughout the month of May for you to attend. You can ask for specific questions. They'll probably have more specific information about the application and questions within the application itself because it will be open at that point. They have an online workshop that will be on May 16th at 1 p.m. And 3 in-person workshops within approximately a week of each other. The first one is on May 21st up near Seattle, starts at 10 o'clock in the morning. The second one is the following day in Spokane on May 22nd. And then the third and final in-person workshop will be in Yakima on May 28th, also beginning at 10 a.m. Registration information, more information about those in-person workshops and the online workshop will be posted here shortly. As soon as we find out that information and we get some of that registration information, we'll work with the Department of Commerce to help disperse it to folks to make sure that you have the ability to go there. If you can make it to one of the in-person workshops, that would be a great idea. You'll have the opportunity to kind of be in the same room with the Department of Commerce folks and possibly have questions that could be answered. So we can go ahead and start taking questions now, Adrian, if we want to. I know that there's been some questions in the chat, so, or if folks have questions and they want to raise their hands, we'll go ahead and do that. So Adrian, if you could just start reading off questions, that would be great.
Sure thing. It looks like we had a couple of questions earlier that Michael Kendall already answered. Would you like me to read those questions and answers out first?
Yes, please. So that way for folks who aren't joining us and can't see the chat, or if they're watching this video, they'll have an opportunity to know what some of those questions were.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
Margie asked, regarding prevailing wages, is it allowable to use volunteer labor for some components of our project? Does that impact grant eligibility? And Michael answered, volunteer labor cannot be part of the project. In-kind contributions of materials are allowable, however. Another question came from Aaron. What are the standards used to define a distressed community? The answer to that came from Michael. The distressed areas list is an aggregation of 3-year unemployment statistics compiled by the State Employee Security Department. The 2024 list is not out yet, but you can find 2022 here, and he gave a link. So we can look into how to share that link out with people if they need it.
Yeah, that sounds
Uh,
great. Thank you for that, Adrian.
Sure thing. And so it looks like Aaron followed up with another question about how long are the in-person workshops? And Michael responded approximately 90 minutes.
90 minutes, so an hour and a half roughly.
And looks like we have a question from John. Who makes up the advisory board, legislators or community members? And I see
That's
no answer to that yet.
that's a great question. So that's a great question. I don't personally know if there are any legislators on there. I know that there's community members, folks that are, in the arts and culture field. Our agency director from the Arts Commission is a member. She's been on that advisory panel for quite a long time. Michael, are there any legislators on the board or not?
Nope, there sure aren't. They got other things to do and bigger fish to fry. And I would hazard a guess that hardly any of them know anything about arts projects. But the other folks are really great folks, and most of them have been there at least a few cycles, so they know what's going on there. There's a folks from arts, a fellow from Arts Fund is on there. There are generally people who have in the past built these projects and managed these projects and managed these types of operations. They know how tight sometimes that arts nonprofits, their finances can be, and they understand the struggles that can happen when trying to build something new, and once you build it, keeping it open.
Absolutely. And I would say, just to add to that, they also understand how scrappy and creative nonprofit organizations can be in making things happen, right? And making stuff work. So you could look at a project that I don't know, on paper, it could be like, how is this going to work? But they know that based on the organization or how they've done things, or if they've been around for a long time, for example, then obviously they've been able to make it work somehow. And so they can recognize that, which I think is helpful. Having that context of understanding what it's like to be in the nonprofit organization and be in that field and what it takes to do things is very different than how it works in the private sector and certainly in the public sector. So I appreciate that we have folks who've been in that place before and know what it takes to make things happen. Are there any other questions, Adrian? I see things popping up in the chat, but they're coming in so quickly that I can't quite see what they all are.
Yes, it looks like we have a few. The
Okay.
next one is from Jill. What is the maximum percent of in-kind value that can be used towards the match?
Oh, that's a great question. Michael, that's a question for you. The maximum percent of in kind.
There's no firm number there. And obviously, we don't want to see anything that's heavily leveraged, both with in kind and with loans. That's another thing to consider. If you don't have a lot of money raised through a capital campaign and you've got a big chunk of loan, it might be a little early.
That's great. That's actually good feedback. So be aware of that. So what is your cash ratio, cash to debt or cash to in kind, and making sure that you have a good mix of those and that you have a decent amount of cash, right? Okay. Next question, please, Adrienne.
Next question comes from Chris. I believe this may have been asked in a previous webinar. If we were looking at a project to start in summer of 2025, would we still be eligible even if some of that work took place before the grant was awarded? Architectural drawings, etc.
Uh, yes, you would be eligible for that. It depends on how, like, if you're talking about, so we did work this past biennium, or this current would be actually this current biennium, would we be eligible to apply some of those costs to this grant? Essentially, the answer is yes. And so goes back 2 years from the grant. So it would be, if I'm not mistaken, it would be in 2022, I think is what July 1 or something, 2022 is what we said for this particular round.
That's correct. We go 3 years back, 3 years
3 years
from the
from the
beginning
beginning.
of the
Right,
biennium in which it's appropriated. And the
right.
upcoming one is the 25-27 biennium. So you're exactly right. It'd be July 1 of 2022 that you could get reimbursed for those costs.
Absolutely. All right. Additional questions, please, Adrienne.
So I think this question was a follow-up on the percentage question. It comes from Betsy. For example, if a building was donated, that counts?
So if a building is donated, what do you need the money for? Are you talking about the renovations? That would be my guess.
Right.
Well, I'd have to
Yes.
take a look at it. I won't automatically say no, for sure.
Right. And that's the thing because you can't, I mean, there's so many different types of projects. I mean, that are so many different kinds of, each project has its own nuances, and each organization sort of has its own nuances as well. And so the folks at the Department of Commerce are very well versed in all of these ins and outs. And so making sure, if you have very, very specific questions about your project, you can connect with them directly to ask those questions is definitely a good idea. We also can provide some of that consultation support in the beginning. Ours is more geared towards people who are in the early stages of planning their project. So we're planning our project, we're looking at timelines, we're trying to decide what this looks like, how do we do a capital campaign, some of those kinds of more nuts and bolts fundamental things, pre-planning almost. And then once you start getting involved more in the application and in the development process, or the building process of your project and what that's going to look like, the folks at Commerce are well suited to answering those very specific questions. Next question, please, Adrienne.
Yes, this one comes from Jill. Has BFA ever funded an outdoor amphitheater or outdoor performance space?
I
That
don't know.
answer,
Have you?
yeah, that answer is yes. It doesn't happen a whole lot because the trick there is it has to be able to be used year round. So it needs to be set up in a way that that it has some sort of cover and that folks won't be freezing during a performance in the winter. But yes, it has happened.
Do
Thank
you know
you.
how long ago that was, Michael, or who that was?
Remember, I think it was on one of the islands.
Okay.
I'd have to go back and look about it. Was at least, well, my poor memory only goes back about 2 biennia, so I think
Okay.
it's at least 3 biennia ago.
So it's been at least a half a dozen, if not more, years than that.
Yes, but
Okay.
it is eligible, but again, you got to be able to put stuff on year round.
Okay, great. That's helpful for folks to remember. This is not for, seasonal things. This is something that has to be available and open to the public all year long. Okay. Next question, please, Adrienne.
This one comes from Irene. Regarding a feasibility study, I understand it's not absolutely required. Will there be places in the application that we could submit various components that might be found in a feasibility study? Example, letters of support from community members, businesses, and/or leaders.
So there,
question.
yeah, go ahead, Michael.
There is already a form for the letters of support, and you get to submit 3 of those, and no more than 3. Our board members will have to read a lot of these things, and we want to make sure that they have time to do so. In terms of something similar to a feasibility study, I would just upload it in the feasibility study section if you think that it can serve as answering some of the questions a feasibility study normally would.
That's a great question. Yeah, so when you're getting those letters of support, make sure that you can get, the cream of the crop, as it were. Okay. All right, next question, Adrian.
This one comes from Terry. If we are building a new facility with a 2-year construction period, would we be encouraged to apply this cycle even if it's possible the project would not be fully completed by 2027?
I would say absolutely yes. So it's a really long process, and it's sort of backward in that instead of the legislature and the governor giving us a bucket of money and then us distributing it, we by statute create these lists, give them to the governor and the House and the Senate, and then they get to choose how much they want to fund. So it's a really long process. The governor won't be signing the 25-27 capital budget until, oh boy, what,
A
May?
year, yeah, a
May
year, more than
2025?
more than a year from now. So if you're ready to break ground, definitely apply. So I mean, the process itself to get through this whole, so we have the application process. Adrian, maybe we can go back a slide, so we can show folks this timeline of what this actually looks like. Okay, so we're applying right now, here, well, starting on May 1st for funding that will be available essentially in almost a year and a half from now. So we in through all this, we make plans for the future, so the funding isn't available. So there's funding for BFA that is being reimbursed and being, spent essentially this fiscal biennium right now. But the folks applied for that funding in two years ago in 2022. And it wasn't until last fall, in fall of 2023, that they were able to start beginning to access that funds. So it is a little bit behind, as Michael said, just because of the sort of process that it takes to get through, some of these government budget processes. So definitely do that, and then you can get obviously at least some of your project funded, if not maybe the entire thing. And the idea is to make sure that you can, they want to be able to expend the funds in the biennium that they're being sort of released. That just makes a lot more sense. They don't want construction projects to go on forever, essentially. So the idea is to get your project up and running and get it done as quickly as you can. We all know that sometimes things happen, but that's the intention of the program. Next question, please, Adrian.
This comes from Nicole. Could you please state again the date that work needs to be completed by?
So the end of the the end of the FY 25-27 biennium will be June 30, 2027.
I can add in onto that. If your project isn't completed by then, we will request a reappropriation of that money, but we'll only do it once.
Right. And of course, there's no guarantee. We can't, it's never something, I mean, they usually will, but we don't want to promise anything and make people believe, so that's the idea, is to get it done quickly.
Yep. And that's because one legislature can't bind the actions of a future legislature. So we can't make any guarantees on what the 27-29 legislature or budget will look like.
Sure, because we have no idea. That's in the future. That's far enough in the future that we can't predict it at this point.
Our next question, comes from Kay. And this is actually 2 questions. On average, how many applicants apply? And the second question, does this support creative co-working spaces for artist development?
I'm trying to remember the last round, how many applied. And Beth or Sarah, do you remember approximately how many applications there were? And then while they're getting on, I will add that we have supported community spaces for artist lofts. We can't support the lofts themselves, right? Because we can't do residential, but we have funded a community area it was, I believe, a combination performance space and gallery space and that kind of thing. So, and if that counts, yeah, we do.
Right. And I think they might even be talking about things that would be like shared, like studio spaces and that sort of thing potentially as well.
Yeah, I think so. And as long as no one's sleeping there, we definitely take a look at it.
Okay, great.
And
And
then
that was our final question.
we still haven't asked that. There it is.
Oh, 40 applicants for 23-25. And I think there was like 32 or 34 projects that were funded. Is
I
that
think that's
correct?
about right. Yeah. I mean, they really try to
I think we lost
Sorry,
Michael. Oh,
I pushed the wrong button.
okay. Go ahead.
The board really tries to get as many projects in, and not only that, but spread the money across the state. It's very hard sometimes to get projects in rural and underserved areas. And there's also a cap of the amount of money that they can fund, which is 18 million. So if there's a whole bunch of really good projects, they'll start at the top with the really big projects and the big requests, and they'll cut those down to try and get everybody at least something.
Exactly. And so that's the thing, I think there was a perception for a while there that, oh, only if we had a big, huge, super fancy, we were building a state-of-the-art facility that, then we could get funded. But that's not the case. They want to be able to make sure that folks all across the state can get funding. They do fund a good amount of smaller sized projects or more scalable projects as well. So don't feel like even if your project is solid, even though it's not super fancy, as long as it demonstrates all the criteria, then and fits the eligibility and all of that, it could be considered for sure. I think there was a couple more questions that popped up,
Yep.
Adrian. Okay.
We do have one more question. This comes from Marnie. What about short-term residencies? For example, not somewhere that folks live long-term, but arts residencies for full weekends through up to 6 months.
They're cool projects, but if there's someone spending the night, it's ineligible.
Right. Now, there could be other aspects of it, like if you're building, say, a whole facility and that's a portion of it, but there are other things that you're building as well that fit the criteria. Those other pieces would be considered to be eligible, but just not the residential. No heads and beds, as it were, I guess is what we could say for that, right? But anything else that's arts and culture related within the eligibility criteria could be considered. Okay, we have about 30 seconds left. So if anyone has a super quick question that could be answered in 30 seconds, we'll take it. All right, Adrian, do you want to forward to the next slide, please? Okay, thank you. So on this slide here is contact information for both me and for Sarah Alway, who is the Building for the Arts Program Manager over at the Department of Commerce. Also, we've included the link to the website, to the webpage. It's kind of a long one, but you could just go to the commerce.wa.gov and probably search for Building for the Arts, or even just do a Google search for Washington Building for the Arts, and it should pop right up. And then you'll be able to look at some of the grant criteria from last time around. If you have specific questions or want to just see, you want to kick the tires on your project, feel free to contact me and I can, help you decide. And then we, will forward you on to the folks at Commerce for more technical questions or for things that are more specific to the application. Thank you all for your time. We will be posting this link or this webinar on our YouTube channel as soon as it gets processed, and then we'll go ahead and send out information to everybody who's registered for all of the sessions about where they can find those links. Again, thank you so much for your time, and we hope you have a great day. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks to your team for always your support.
Thanks, Annette. And thank you, Elizabeth. I always try not to talk too fast because you guys really work so hard.